Hello, Salim Omar here from the Straight Talk about Small Business Success podcast. Welcome to another episode. I am super excited. We've got a special guest. His name is Andrew Alleman. Andrew, welcome.
Thank you. It's great to be here. Thanks for inviting me on the show.
Awesome. Andrew is a podcasting expert and is the founder of podcastguests.com. This service is being used by over 30,000 people to find both guests and podcasts and for experts to get booked on podcast. So, Andrew, I'm really excited. This is something, podcasting, something we've been hearing for the past decade. And before we get into do a deeper dive into what it is and all the nuances around it, quickly share with us what brings you to date, your backstory.
Yeah, it's interesting. So I have a trade publication for the domain name industry, an online blog, if you will, that I've been writing since 2005. And around, I think it was 2014, I started podcasting myself. And I have a podcast about domain names. So talk about a niche that goes along with that. And so I started like you, I was podcasting for a while and I interviewed a lot of people that I knew, and then I ran out of people to interview. And so I started looking around to try to find a way to find guests for my show. And there were some options out there that were really expensive. So I just kind of created my own, and that's kind of what brings me to today. So I have this podcast guest platform, and then I still have a trade publication for the domain name industry.
Wow, and that is so niche for sure. And we
Yeah.
won't talk about that niche because uh, well, we'll definitely talk about podcasting.
Right.
How long have you had this company, podcastguests.com?
So I started it in 2016. So I've been podcasting a little over a year at that point.
Hmm.
And it started really, I was like, well, I have this problem as a podcaster. I assume other podcasters do too. So I just started kind of emailing some other podcasters I knew and some people in the industry and said, hey, I'm going to try this thing here. If you would like help finding guests, go ahead and sign up. It's free. And so it started really slowly, took a couple years to gain a little bit of traction. And then it took a couple more years to kind of get where it was, really interesting. And then, it's grown a lot over the past couple of years during the pandemic as well.
Got it. Now, looking at your website before this interview, your wife and yourself are both podcasters, and you both
Right.
started this business. Is that correct?
Well, I started this particular business. I help her with her podcast a little bit as well.
Hmm.
But yeah, we're both podcasters, so we kind of know what it's like to be a host of a show, and so I think that gives us a lot of perspective. As you know, hosting a show, there's a lot of work that goes into it, right? And so to kind of understand that perspective and the challenges of podcasters is really helpful.
Hmm. Now, to talk to us about what are the benefits of being a guest on a podcast. I mean, so this is my podcast. You're coming in as a guest, and
Right.
there are times when I'm a guest on other people's podcast. What benefits does a guest get from appearing as a guest on a podcast?
Yeah, I mean, we can use this as a prime example, right? So I'm on your show, and my goal here is to educate your audience, right? To make them say, "Hey, this guy really knows what he's talking about," and hopefully, some of the listeners at the end of the day will be like, "Hey, either I want to learn more about this podcast guest, service, or I want to be a guest on podcasts. I'll go to their site." Or they'll connect with me on social media and follow me there, right? So it's all about growing your audience and growing your brand. But I
Hmm.
caution that you should go into each podcast interview asking yourself, how can I make this a very educational episode for the audience, right? So I'm coming here to teach and explain rather than to sell. And that's a key
Hmm.
mistake that I think a lot of people make when they go on a podcast. But yeah, in general, it's about growing your audience, growing your brand. Potentially you end up getting some new customers from your appearances, right? In the long run, right? That's one of your goals. But you should look at that as kind of an overarching goal, not a goal of every single episode that you're on.
Hmm. Well said. And what's the benefits for the podcaster to have great guests such as yourself on a program?
Yeah, I think there are a couple benefits. So, first of all, when you're trying to grow your own audience as a podcaster, having someone on the show that might bring some of their own audience to it is very beneficial, right? So, hopefully,
Mm,
that guest will help promote the show on social media or through email, something along those lines too, which hopefully gets you more listeners as a host. And then you also want someone who just does a great job, right? Entertains or educates your audience so that your audience is happy and keeps coming back to your episodes in the future. Now, I will
mm.
say, a lot of podcasters start a show because they want to have a huge audience and sell ads, right? Which is was pretty difficult to do. I think a better goal for most hosts starting out is to create new relationships and grow their own audience through their podcast. So I think that is a great starting an example I always give. I know you're a CPA, but as if there's a lawyer or a CPA somewhere is interviewing entrepreneurs, in their community. That sort of thing is a way to kind of just you're not selling your services, but you're making connections and you're getting your name out there by doing it.
Yeah, yeah. No, I love this strategy, and I've used it for many many years. When I started my accounting practice, Andrew, early on, I recognized the benefits of education-based marketing or content marketing. I preferred it over selling and
Hmm.
peddling services. I like to offer education or content which is going to be valuable to the listener or to the reader or to the viewer, and it's a great way to bring quality, build quality clients.
Right,
Not
right.
everyone's
That's
going
right.
to be a client, but it's a great
Right.
way to start a conversation. And like you said, right, it's for people to find out, hey, what do you do? What about your story and so forth.
Mhm.
And if they like that, there's, they may continue, they may continue the journey. And really, podcasting is one avenue and one very popular media these days. But there's writing books or special reports and blog content and so forth, right? All
Mhm.
these are different ways of kind of bringing people to us.
Right. And you shouldn't do just one, right? All of these should be part of the mix.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And there is the concept of repurposing, right? As a business owner, we've got only so much time in the day. And so it's like, all right, how can I create one quality piece of content? And is there a way I can convert this piece of content, this original piece of content, and really bring it as a blog post or an email nurture, put it as part of my email nurture sequence, social media, and so forth. So it's really
Exactly.
repurposing it to do that. Yeah.
Exactly.
So how can, to appear as a guest on podcasts, how does one craft the perfect pitch to a
Yeah.
podcaster?
Right. Yeah, I always recommend to people to create what's called a one sheet. And think of this as like a one-page pitch for who you are. They use these a lot in Hollywood, right? It's like, here's, a picture of this person, and then here's who they are, what, films they've been in, that sort of thing. So you want to do the same thing for you as a guest on a podcast. And so part of that is putting together a professional or fun persona, right? Depending on what you do, right? There are entertainers in this space that want to entertain, and then there are educators. And there are a number of things that I think you should do there. So first you should come up with kind of what the topics are that you can talk about. And they should all be fairly related. I think a lot of people are like, "Oh, I could talk about these 5 different things." But if they're unrelated, people will think, "Wow, this person's a jack of all trades and a master of none," right? And you really want that
Mm,
master to be your guest on a show. I also recommend that people say what they'll do to help promote the show afterward as part of their pitch. So a lot of podcasters want to know, podcasters want to grow their audience too. So if you say, "Hey, I'm going to promote this to my, you know, 10,000 Facebook fans or Twitter followers," that sort of thing, that'll get the person excited as well. So when you actually craft a pitch to a show, you want to definitely customize it to the show. Explain why you think you're a fit for that audience and why you can educate or entertain that audience as well, and then
mhm,
what you will do to help promote the show afterward. I think those are kind of the key things to a perfect pitch.
mm. That's awesome. Great advice there. So what's more important as a guest? Podcast size or the size of the listenership, the audience, or is it the fit?
Right. I would definitely go with fit here. I think a lot of people try to
Hmm.
get on big podcasts that are not a fit, right? And so when you think about the example we gave earlier of me being on this show, right? So the listeners here are entrepreneurs and small business owners, and those people should be interested in being either a guest on podcasts or on having their own podcast, right? Whereas if I went on a big show that was about entertainment, first of all, I'm not going to be able to do a good job, right? Like, let's say it's a comedy show. I'm not going to do a great job because I'm not a comedian. And that audience there really won't be interested in me. They won't be interested in learning more about me or my company and that sort of thing. So I definitely say go with fit over size. And I'd also encourage people when they're starting out to really focus on, hey, this show's a fit. It might not be that big, but think of it as practice, right? So if you're going on
Hmm.
shows when you're starting, the more shows you're on, the better you'll be at being a guest, right? So you start,
Hmm.
you've faced every question possible, you've kind of
Hmm.
honed your message and that sort of thing. So I encourage people to not be too choosy at first, but definitely when given the choice, go after those podcasts that are a good fit for you as opposed to the size of the show's listenership.
Yeah, that's great. I'm curious to know, like, what companies, what type of businesses are, or what type of services are good for as a guest to come in as a guest, and which ones are not. So if you've
You
got a
know,
company, say that's an alarm company that's
mm,
selling alarm services, can they be a guest on a podcast?
yeah, yeah, I think they can. They just again, they need to look for the fit, right? And so,
Mm,
there are security podcasts out there, right? There are safety podcasts out there.
mm,
And those sorts of things seem like they might be a good fit for that. Or even going on, if it's the founder of the company, going on shows where that feature entrepreneurs and that sort of thing. So maybe you're talking more about, your strategy and that sort of thing. But even though entrepreneurs need alarm systems too, right? And so, you still have some of
mm,
the
mm,
audience there. But I would say really in that case, you're looking for those niche podcasts that are about safety, security, technology, that sort of thing. So I've yet to come across
mm,
someone who I don't think is a good fit for being a guest on podcasts and where it wouldn't make good marketing sense for them. But I will say that, sometimes you need to find the right shows. There are tens of thousands of entrepreneurship targeted shows out there, so that's pretty easy. But some other niches are pretty, they're fairly small. The nice thing there, though, is you can come up with your short list. You'll be a good fit for them as a guest, and then you can reach out to them to be on their shows.
mm. In your case in point, I mean, the business that you had in 2014, like how you started podcasting, the domain,
Mhm.
right? It was the domain name. That seems pretty niched. And you were, one wouldn't think that, oh, wow, there's a podcast on that topic.
Right,
And
right.
you
Yeah,
had
there
that
is a
topic.
podcast for every topic, and I made it through a year of guests. I mean, it's interesting to me. A lot of people look at the domain name industry and don't realize how big that is, right? And there's so many niches out there that are bigger than we think. I mean, we have GoDaddy's the biggest company in our space, and it's a multi-billion-dollar company. And people always say, "Hey, wait, you have a site about domain names, and you write daily about domain names?" And yes, there's there's something to talk about every day. So I think no matter what your topic is, there are podcasts out there that are fit for you. If there aren't, then maybe you should start your own show.
Hmm, great. What are some mistakes podcasters make when selecting a guest for their show?
Right, right. That's a good question. Well, first of all, I always say screen that person in some way, right? Whether it's listening to them for a few minutes on a previous show they've been on to make sure that they're answering questions clearly, they're speaking clearly, they're not just pitching, a product or a service on the show. Kind of doing that little bit of screening. And again, if they've been on shows before, you should ask them some of the shows and get links to those. Frankly, they should have them on their one sheet that you look at. We actually added something to our podcastguest.com one sheets where you can upload audio, right? Like a welcome message, like, "Hi, I'm Andrew. I can come on your show and talk about this." Just to give people some
Hmm.
flavor, or maybe it's a YouTube video. I'd also say a lot of times podcasters go after kind of celebrities, if you will, or mini celebrities in their space. which is great. You should do that, but those people probably won't spend as much effort promoting the show afterward, right? They're moving on to the next thing. And so, yes, it's nice to have their name, a big name on your show, but sometimes it's the people that are smaller players, if you will, in the space that are more honored to be on your show who are going to do the most work to help promote it. So I would say definitely do some screening. Don't necessarily look just at the celebrities or the people with the big social media followings. And then as a host, you also want to prepare that person to some extent, right? So whether that is making sure they have the right audio setup, we're both wearing headsets, which is very important. A lot of people don't know that if they don't host their own podcast. So I would say preparing them for that as well. And I typically give a short outline on where I think the conversation will go to the guest as well. So we're talking a few bullet points here, not the exact questions, although, you can do that as well. But I find that helps as well, especially if the person's a little nervous, or if there's some data they'll want to look up ahead of the show.
Mm, nice. And so as a potential, this is so good. I really appreciate
Sure.
you giving us not only the time, but the wisdom and the insights that you're sharing about this field that's becoming more and more popular
Right.
and effective to build a business, a brand, and that. As a potential guest, what are some things I can do to increase the chance that a podcaster will accept me as a guest in their program?
Yeah, so I think it comes back a lot to the pitch, right, that we talked about, and telling them what you'll do to help promote the show. But
Hmm.
I'd also encourage you as a guest to have some specificity, to kind of niche down, as we say, which is, there are a lot of, say, business coaches out there, right? And if you're just a business coach pitching to be on a show, it's like, okay, that's interesting. But let's say you were a dentist, right? And someone said, and you have a show for other dentists to improve their practice. If someone came to you and just said, I'm a business coach, I'd love to be a guest on your show, you might be interested. If they come and say, I'm a business coach for dental practices, and I have 5 ways that dental practices can increase their business within the next 12 months, that should be more compelling to that dentist, right? So this person has specific experience in my industry. You can
Hmm.
see this too with, accountants, right? And CPAs. Some of them specialize in certain types of businesses, right? And if you're that type of business, that's really interesting to you because you're like, oh, this person has seen all the issues that could possibly face me here,
Right.
right? As opposed to
Yeah.
a generalist, which is what most of us have. Same thing with an attorney. You don't hire an estate attorney to do intellectual property law or a car accident type thing, right? And so kind of niching down and being a specialist there, I think increases your odds.
Makes a lot of sense. This is, yeah, really, really good. What's the best way, Andrew, for folks to reach out to you?
Well, so if you go to podcastguest.com and you submit a contact through there, it'll go directly to me. I tell people if they just sign up for our free service there on the homepage, they'll get an email directly from me and they're welcome to reply to that and ask any questions. So that's the best way to get in touch.
Awesome. Askguests.com. That's a great URL.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. As a domain name person, I had to have
There you go.
a good a good
Exactly.
domain name.
Awesome. Thanks, Andrew. Really appreciate everything you've shared with us.
My pleasure.